Intro to the United Nations, the 1963 Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This is a photograph taken of an atomic bomb explosion, which is often depicted as a mushroom cloud. In this presentation, I will be covering the 1963 Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. After the presentation, the questions we will be able to answer are: what was the 1963 Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty? Who were the major actors involved during the chief negotiations? And lastly, how is this international statute relevant in the modern era? So to begin, the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963, also referred to as the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, was a formal agreement between three of the world superpowers: the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. The Limited Test Ban Treaty was an agreement premised on nuclear arms control. It prohibited the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, at sea, and on land. The United States, Great Britain, and Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, remain 3 out of the 5 permanent members in the United Nations Security Council today, with express veto powers. France and China are the only other 2 permanent members. And currently, there are 15 members in the United Nations Security Council. Only 5 are permanent, and the other 10 members serve 2-year terms. The Limited Test Ban Treaty was also seen as an important first step towards a non-proliferation treaty, functioning towards disarmament. This was the only other agreement formalized during the Cold War era between the 2 parties, the United States and the Soviet Union, at an attempt to impose nuclear arms control. The United Nations General Assembly also favored implementing a more comprehensive limited nuclear test ban treaty at the time, but for the most part found many of the world superpowers unresponsive. Nonetheless, by 1964, arms reduction was well underway. The Soviets had announced a 4.5% cut on its defense budget, and Washington then responded with a 2% cut and a 25% decrease in enriched uranium, a key ingredient needed for manufacturing nuclear weapons. In retrospect, for much of the 20th century, the United States was combating a political ideology known as communism. The Red Scare had erupted post-World War I, which was an esteem predicated on the apprehension that communism could spread to the West, and these sentiments remained for the later part of the century until the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. Throughout the years, the fears from the Red Scare were unrelenting, and added later to the belief in domino theory, which asserted that if one country fell to communism, the rest would soon follow falling down. With the development of the atomic bomb, under the auspices of the Manhattan Project, ultimate concerns around the world began to arise from the serious, powerful impact a weapon of this magnitude could cause, namely the 2 atomic bombs used in the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki led to mass devastation, altering the environment with radiation waves and completely decimating the population. In addition, the 2 atomic bombs used in the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki manifested immense nuclear capability and the overall danger of internecine warfare. As more and more world superpowers came to develop their own nuclear weapons, implementing more non-proliferation treaties became imminent. Mainly, the real concern over controlling nuclear weapons was realized when we were at the state of brinksmanship during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the United States was on the verge of a catastrophic, all-out nuclear war with the Soviet Union. As a consequence, there had been total disenfranchisement between communism and the Western world, and simultaneously those who condemned it. In late 1961, the Soviet Union had exploded a hydrogen bomb so powerful it wreaked total environmental havoc. That following year, the United States detonated a nuclear device roughly 280 miles above the Pacific Rim, the only such experiment conducted in outer space, causing extensive power and communications failure in Hawaii. By that same year, support to end nuclear testing was increasingly worldwide. However, the Cuban Missile Crisis was an incident that reached a climax of tensions and hostilities between the United States and the Soviet Union. This renowned incident involved the US, Soviet Union, and Cuba, and brought the world to a state of brinksmanship. Negotiations were reached only as a deterrent for mutually assured destruction. In my opinion, this conflict began because of a rivalry over establishing primacy, influence, and determining who was more powerful. Fidel Castro, John F. Kennedy, and Nikita Khrushchev were all respective leaders at the time, and yet they suffered utter mutual humiliation as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fidel Castro, for one, was infuriated, humiliated even, having to return the missiles back to Khrushchev. His outburst stated, "Nikita, mariquita, lo que se da no se quita," which meant, Nikita, you faggot, what you give, you do not take back. As for JFK, John F. Kennedy had reported to the American public via television news that there were missiles in Cuba. Military intelligence was collected from satellites in outer space, which had recorded photographs confirming that there were missiles in Cuba. Evidently, there was a clear and present danger within American shores. Nikita Khrushchev was exposed and had also been humiliated. Namely, he reinforced the suspicions of the Americans. Some critics believe it was not necessary to alarm the public on what could have been a direct negotiation between world leaders. In fact, Nikita Khrushchev argued that JFK took his course of action because he was afraid to confront Washington politicians on his own. Nonetheless, negotiations were made to remove the missiles if the United States agreed to also remove their missiles from Turkey. Despite these tensions and struggles from the Cold War era, the United States has never fought an actual war with Russia, even today. Alternatively, they had signed the Non-Aggression Pact, realizing that fighting each other could destroy the world. Not only did these powers have to agree to limit the testing, but also they had to agree to a predetermined number of weapons inspections. Presumably, the Soviet Union had agreed to about 3 weapons inspections under Nikita Khrushchev. Talks began to surface between the United States and the Soviet Union approximately 2 years before they came to agree on a limited nuclear test ban treaty. Arguably, it was mainly the Cuban Missile Crisis which really instigated the two parties, the United States and the Soviet Union, to seek a peaceful resolution and accept responsibility of power in terms of nuclear weapons testing and capability. Great Britain was seen more as a mediator during this controversy, not in a direct rivalry against the USSR or the USA per se. On July 2nd of 1963, Nikita Khrushchev declared that he was ready to accept the terms of a nuclear test ban treaty in the atmosphere, underwater, and on land, but not underground. Now I would like to show you a brief video of the convention on the signing of the 1963 Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which was signed in Moscow, Russia, better known as the Kremlin, on August 5, 1963.
Советский Союз на протяжении уже многих лет выступает за прекращение испытаний ядерного оружия. Теперь этот вопрос решен в отношении запрещения ядерных взрывов в 3 средах. If collectively we and other nations pursue a course to ensure that the forward momentum of this agreement is maintained by further steps, man's long, hopeful quest for peace will cease to be only a dream and will begin to acquire solid reality. Every human family can live from now on free from the fear that their unborn children will be affected by man-made poison in the air. Let the nations of the world now, recognizing that war is, as stated, seek most diligently for ways to convert the old and sterile Cold War based on old-fashioned ideas of inevitable conflict and seek a genuine peace based on the recognition of the truth that all men are brothers.
The Limited Test Ban Treaty was signed 3 months prior to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. More importantly, the overall concern of the impact of nuclear capability led to the formulation of further treaties and conventions to assuage apprehensions among the international community and commit to reforms on peace and security, moreover reflecting the environment and, of course, humanity. The treaties were ultimately concerned with prohibiting the testing of nuclear weapons on land, the atmosphere, and at sea, but were more comprehensive by design, such as the Outer Space Treaty of 1962, focusing on preventing nuclear weapons testing in the atmosphere, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean in 1968, which focused on a nuclear test ban in a particular territorial region. Thirdly, the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1970, which focused on disarmament and halting the production of nuclear weapons. And finally, the SALT Talks 1 and 2 of 1972 and 1979, which facilitated dialogues between the United States and the Soviet Union. Despite an attempt to devise a more comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty over previous decades, the United Nations and the international community has made a futile attempt to prevent other countries from developing their own nuclear weapons today. For instance, the development of nuclear weapons has continued to spread in more troubling regions such as China, India, Israel, Pakistan, and North Korea. This is a map of nuclear weapons stockpiles around the world. In conclusion, I would like to end by saying that technology is unprecedented in the modern era. Learning from past mistakes is critical. Nuclear capability requires a major responsibility of world superpowers, because how these weapons are used is of primary concern to the United Nations and the international community. John F. Kennedy once stated that nuclear weapons have the power to destroy humanity 10 times over. The United Nations Security Council is primarily concerned with peace and security, saving humanity and the environment. The United Nations has endeavored to prevent the development of nuclear weapons from spreading in order to save humanity and all forms of life. Were nuclear weapons to fall into the wrong hands and be put to recreational use or testing, this kind of wrongful access could very much lead to the end of the world.